Hey guys, what's up? My name is Zach, and today we're doing a 2018 Senate election prediction. So today is October 15th, and a number of things have changed throughout the Senate map, and we're also about 3 or 4 weeks away from November 6th, the day of the midterms, and today we're going to be seeing how things have changed since I made my last Senate prediction video on October 1st. So in case it isn't obvious based on the polls, the Democrats are now at a much larger disadvantage compared to where they were when I made my last Senate prediction video, and this is going to take a heavy effect in a number of races, as I'll be covering throughout this video. And Nebraska I'll be calling safe for the GOP for this video, and this is because for a number of reasons. One, there hasn't really been a number of very in-depth polls taken in this state, so I can't really base my call off of polls. However, this state does have a pretty strong Republican identity, and Deb Fischer has a pretty solid approval throughout Nebraska, and there really isn't any reason why you can justify Jane Raybould having any chance at taking this Senate seat. So for that reason, I would call it solidly in the GOP's column. I forgot to call Hawaii, my bad. However, Michigan I would also call solidly in the Democrats' column, as I did in my last video, and this is because, as I said in my last video, Debbie Stabenow has been leading consistently against John James in polls, and double digits as well, and I really don't see any path for John James to take the Senate seat. I believe there was once a path for him, maybe earlier in the election cycle. However, we're not seeing any headway on his part into the polls, and I really don't think that there's much of a chance at him winning at this point, now that we're 3 or 4 weeks until the midterms. Some other states they'll be moving from likely Democrat to solid Democrat will be Pennsylvania and Ohio, and this is virtually for the same reason as I call Michigan solidly in the Democrats' column. Both Democrats here have been leading very strongly against their competitors in this state since the first poll's been taken, and at this point I don't think there's any way for either Republicans in these states to take these Senate seats, so for that reason, Ohio and Pennsylvania will be moving from likely Democrat to solid Democrat. Mississippi special election I would call likely GOP, and this is because this is a three-way race. There are 2 Republicans running here and 1 Democrat, so that's going to mean vote splitting. In any election where there's vote splitting, it's not going to be solid in either party's column. And also, Mike Espy is a pretty well-known Democrat and a pretty experienced Democrat, so if both those factors taken into consideration, I'd call it likely in the Republicans' column. And there also hasn't really been a whole lot of polls taken in for this election. Once there are, or if there are, I can base this election off of that much better. Moving on to New Jersey, I would call New Jersey likely, whoops, wrong state. New Jersey I would call likely in the Democrats' column. Bob Menendez has been making a comeback in recent polls. He was kind of underwater, leading by very narrow margins, I believe +3 at one point, but since then he's been coming back with double digits over Bob Hugin. However, I do believe I need to wait a bit longer to call this state anything but solid. If I start to see more polls consistently showing Bob Menendez with a solid lead, then it will move from likely to solid in the Democrats' column. As for Wisconsin, same deal. I'm going to call it likely in the Democrats' column, and this is because Tammy Baldwin has been leading consistently in polls, but it hasn't been by above 10 points, and that's a big factor in why I would call any of these states likely or solid for the Democrats or for the Republicans. Once I start to see more polls that show a consistent lead for Tammy Baldwin, then I believe it would move from likely to solid. However, it still remains likely. Same with that special election. Tina Smith has been leading by, I believe, 7 points on average. So I need to start to see more polls in order to call this election anything but likely for the Democrats. Once we get closer, and once I make my last Senate prediction, which should be the day before the midterms occur, I believe that assuming that nothing changes in these races, they'll be moved from likely to solid Democrat regardless of how the polls have changed, just because it's unlikely for anything major to happen the day after that would cause these elections to change. Going down to West Virginia, I'm going to continue to call this state likely in the Democrats' column, and this is mostly because Joe Manchin has been consistently leading in polls, as I said before. He's been making healthcare a very big issue for his campaign, and pre-existing conditions a very big part of his campaign as well, and I believe he will use Obamacare to ride his way to another term as the West Virginia senator, and in general likely for the Democrats. Going over to Montana, it really is kind of frustrating that there hasn't been a whole lot of polls taken in this state. However, I feel pretty confident calling it likely Democrat. And this is because Jon Tester has a very high approval, especially for a Democrat in a red state. And as I said in my last prediction video, the competitor really doesn't have that much experience or name recognition. If the Republicans nominate someone better and with more name recognition than Matt Rosendale, then I believe that this state would be more competitive. However, that's not the case. Nothing's really changed since my last video for the state. Likely Democrat. Going down to Texas, I will call the state likely GOP, moving it from leaning red to likely red. And this is because there's been, I think, 2 or 3 polls taken in this state that show Ted Cruz leading by 7 or 8 points or more. And at this point, I don't think that there's a pathway for Beto O'Rourke to win here. I believe there was a possibility for him to win a few months ago when he was being more competitive in the polls and getting more spotlight in general. But I believe that time has passed, and I believe that this state will probably go to the Republicans based on the polls and based on the factors I listed before. Now moving on to leans. I will be moving North Dakota from tilting red to leaning red. We've seen Kevin Cramer leading by astounding margins, plus 10, plus 15 over Heidi Heitkamp. And I believe this is mostly because of Heidi Heitkamp's announcement that she will not vote for Brett Kavanaugh. There's a direct correlation between when she made that announcement and when polls started to really go against her. The only reason I'm not calling this state likely is because I need to start to see more polls that show Kevin Cramer with that same consistent lead. If I do, then I'll move to likely. However, I don't think that's a big possibility. I think that they'll probably go back to Kevin Cramer leading by plus 5 or plus 6, which will leave it leaning. But for now, North Dakota will be leaning GOP, considering the major shift in polls that we've seen since my last video. Going down to Arizona, I will call this state leaning in the Democrats' column, the same column I made before. I do realize that the most recent poll has Martha McSally leading by plus 6, but this is pretty misleading. For one, this poll was taken before polls that showed Kyrsten Sinema leading by plus 3 and plus 4 were taken. It was just announced after. So really not a whole lot has changed here, and I need to start to see consistent polls that show Martha McSally with that kind of lead before I call the state anything but leading Democrat. So for that reason, I'd leave it leaning in Kyrsten Sinema's column. Going over to Tennessee, another very big change in the state. I'll be moving the state from tilt Democrat all the way to lean red, and this is because Marsha Blackburn has been leading by very, very solid margins, plus 15, plus 10, all double digits in the recent polls, and this pushes this state all the way out of tilt blue, which is what I had it before, into lean red. Honestly, I think that Phil Bredesen has very much an uphill climb in the state if he wants to dig his way out of that hole that those polls have put him in. But in general, leaning Republican. Once I start to see more polls that show Marsha Blackburn with that kind of lead, I'll move it from lean red over to likely red. However, if something of the opposite effect changes, if Marsha Blackburn no longer has that lead, then I'll probably move them to tilt red. But in general, I think that the Republicans should feel mildly optimistic about winning this state come November 6th. Moving into tilts, I will be moving Nevada from lean blue to tilt blue, and this is because we've been seeing consistent polls that show Dean Heller with plus 2 and plus 6, I believe, margins, and this will change the state. I need to start to see more consistent leads by Dean Heller before I move this state out of the Democrats' column entirely into the GOP's column, which would be a very big transition from where the state has been for the entirety of the year. But Democrats should be very worried because this state has been in their column all year, as I said before, and it's only now when it's starting to slip out of their column. So Nevada, tilt blue, moving it from lean to tilt for my last prediction. Going down to Nevada, going over to Indiana, there really hasn't been any new polls taken in this state, and there really hasn't been any new factors that have been brought up. So for those reasons, I would still call it tilting in the Democrats' column. Joe Donnelly, I think that his vote for against Brett Kavanaugh will be a disadvantage for him. However, I think that he will be able to maneuver his way to another term just because of the polls that we've been seeing, and I do believe that Joe Donnelly will win, at least currently. I think it's currently the case. Again, I need to see more polls before I can make any changes for the state. So hopefully more polls will come up before the November 6th election. But for now, it remains tilt blue. Same with Florida, that remains tilt blue. There really hasn't been too many new polls taken in the state, but the ones that haven't taken show Bill Nelson leading over Rick Scott. And like I said, I need to see more polls taken in the state before I can move it out of the Democrats' column and into the red. But for now, Democrats should feel mildly optimistic about winning the state come November 6th. Now going over to Missouri. This state is still very tricky. It's in dead heat between Claire McCaskill and Josh Hawley. And again, Claire McCaskill's vote against Brett Kavanaugh will be a factor against her in the state as well. But I will still call it tilting in Claire McCaskill's column. Again, there really hasn't been major polls taken in these three states that are tilting. And I need to start to see more polling before I can make any more complex calls for these states. But for now, it remains the same. All right, so in general, as you can see here, the Democrats are now at a very large disadvantage. They have lost the seats compared to my last prediction. Tennessee is now out of their column. North Dakota, they had a chance of winning at before this prediction. Now they virtually have no chance at winning. Nevada is slowly starting to slip out of their column. Arizona is a bit risky as well. Texas is pretty much lost cause for them now, and they should be worried. The Democrats really should be worried about the Senate. If you ask me, there really wasn't a big possibility for them to win the Senate to begin with, but they really should be worried about conserving the amount of senators that they already have and trying to win at least one seat, which I think, based on this prediction, as you can see, they have a net gain of one, but they should be concerned that they should be concerned for the future in general, because this could very easily become Republicans 52 to 40 to 47 or 48 or something like that, which would be very devastating for them if you ask me. Alright, so this is the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I just want to say thank you guys so much for the just the attention my channel's been getting. I believe that my last Senate prediction video is almost at 15,000 views, which is a margin that just shocks me in general. My midterm video, which was like an hour and 15 minutes long, is nearing 10,000 views as well. Thank you guys so much for that. My channel is on track to reaching 300 subscribers as well. That's a huge accomplishment, at least in my view, based on where I was a few months ago. So thank you guys so much for that as well. And if you're new to the channel, please like, share, and subscribe. It's the only way for channels like mine to continue to grow. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.